Hello one and all, Jasper here, and today we'll be starting a bit of a series called Iron Throwdown, inspired by Danzy and her Westeros brawl. Check out her channel and subscribe, and maybe she gets a sudden flux of subscribers, she'll wake up from her slumber. Though while my series is inspired by hers, there are a few key differences. She goes into the character's political power and intelligence before declaring a winner. In our case, we'll be specifically looking at combat capabilities. With a more focused subject, we can go into far more detail than Danzy could, as we'll be analyzing their weapons, armors, and skills to find out who would win an Iron Throwdown.
What? That's already taken? By who? Death Battle? Never heard of them. Are they popular? Okay. Look, I got an idea, okay?
Ahem. We'll be looking over their tools, defenses, and talents to figure out who will be victorious in an Iron Throwdown. There, now their lawyers can't touch us. Anyway, before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of Jaime Lannister fighting against Oberyn Martel, I have two special rules for these fighters in particular. First, no poison. If we allow Oberyn to poison his spear, then he is pretty much guaranteed to win at best and a draw at worst. Given his skills, I find it incredibly unlikely for Jaime to come out of this fight without any scratches, and even a small one would be enough to mean the end of him. Also, Sandor Clegane would clearly not approve.
Poison's a woman's weapon.
Second, Jaime has both hands, or else this wouldn't even be a contest between the two. Now, on to my credentials as to why I am a good judge on medieval combat. Let's get into our characters, starting with the Golden Lion, Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister, the son of Tywin Lannister, and arguably one of the greatest swordsmen in all of Westeros, especially since Arthur Dayne is dead and Barristan is off in Essos. In his early years, he squired under Sumner Crackcall of the Westerlands, but there is so little to go off, so we won't be able to really understand what kind of training Jaime did. Though whatever kind of training, it was clear it had great effects on Jaime's combat ability. At just 13 years old, Jaime won his first melee tourney, though how it played out, we have no idea, and I think Bronn said it best.
But any man who's been in battle knows that the more men involved, the less skill needed, the more chance of accidents.
Don't worry, Jaime fans, we're about to work with something a lot more substantial, as the fact that Jaime Lannister was knighted by none other than Arthur Dayne after showing his skill and bravery against the Kingswood Brotherhood at just 15 years old speaks volume to his skill. According to George R.R. Martin himself, Arthur Dayne is the greatest knight in Westeros history. Not long after, he was also chosen to join the Kingsguard, a title supposedly for only the most skilled and knights in all of Westeros. Though, in all honesty, the title of Kingsguard seems to hold less weight than many might assume. After all, just look at Robert's Kingsguard. It is also heavily implied that Jaime was chosen more as a slight against Tywin, and it seemed to just be coincidental that he was a very skilled warrior. Not to mention, some members of the Kingsguard were none too happy about him joining. According to Tyrion Lannister, Barristan Selmy thought he was too young and untried, and after the rebellion, well, his opinion on him didn't exactly improve, though it should be noted he didn't seem to ever doubt Jaime's skill at arms. After this, Jaime does not have a lot of feats where we can judge his talent and skill at arms, as once a member of the Kingsguard, he was treated more as a hostage instead, as Aerys used him to make sure that Tywin would stay out of Robert's rebellion. Though that ended when Jaime thrusted his sword through his back, taking the king's life. Good for the kingdom, but not exactly an impressive feat. During Robert's reign, he participated in tourneys, some of which he won, but since horse combat will not be important in this fight, we can take these bits of information with a little less substance. We can skip a lot of moments in the first book, as we need to jump over to the Whispering Woods, as that's the real only moment he had where he actually showed some combat efficiency. And before anyone brings it up, no, we are not taking into account the fight between Jaime and Eddard in the show. That didn't happen in the books. In the books, all Jaime did was ride away and order his men to kill Eddard's guards. There was no duel of the swords. Besides, Book Jaime would destroy Book Eddard. If anything, the show makes him look worse than he actually is. Anyways, during the War of the Five Kings, one of the most notable moments that show off his combat abilities are put on display during the Battle of the Whispering Wood. And by put on display, I mean told to us by some eyewitnesses, though credible eyewitnesses. He killed Darren Hornward, Eddard Karstark and Torrhen Karstark while trying to get to Robb, only being stopped because his sword got stuck in Torrhen. Each man was picked to be Robb's personal guard, so while we know nothing about their combat capabilities, the fact they were chosen to protect the soon-to-be King of the North should put them at the very least above average in combat abilities, and to be cut down so effortlessly by Jaime shows the skill gap he has compared to other highborn lords. The final and possibly the most important moment that gives us the best idea of how skilled Jaime used to be is his confrontation with Brienne of Tarth. During the duel, he compares Brienne to characters such as Sandor Clegane when it comes to her skill and strength. Though in this instance, I think quoting exactly what was going through Brienne's mind gives us a better idea on how the battle was really going. He was weak from imprisonment and chained at the wrist. No knight in the Seven Kingdoms could have stood against him at his full strength with no chains to hamper him. Jaime had done many wicked things, but the man could fight. Sadly, that is where we will have to end our observations of Jaime's skills, as not long after, well, I think most of you know what happened.
This should help you remember.
Let's continue on to Jaime's choice of weapons and armor. He prefers to wear full plate armor covered in gold, with his chosen weapon being a tried and true sword and board combo. The sword specifically is described as a longsword, a very classic knight setup, but one that Jaime is quite skilled at. Even those who despise the man seem to at least confess the man is a skilled warrior. But how will the Golden Lion fare against the Red Snake of Dorn? Oberyn Martel, brother to the Lord Paramount Dorn Martel, was arguably the most dangerous man in Dorn. His first fight that we know of was when he was 16 years old. Caught in bed with Lord Edgar Jordanward's paramour, the teen was challenged to a duel. But given the status of Oberyn Martel, it was decided to be to first blood. Both fighters took blows and cuts, however the conclusion was quite different, as Edgar's wounds festered from the shallow cuts, killing him, causing many people to believe that Oberyn had poisoned his blade before the duel. And this is what earned him the nickname of the Red Viper. This caused him to be exiled from Dorne so that House Martell could make peace with House Yornwood. However, this proved to be more of a reward for Oberyn rather than a punishment, as while in the free cities of Essos, he learned quite a lot about poison and other talents. But that bit of info is completely useless for this fight. After all,
I've heard it said that poison is a woman's weapon.
Yes.
Oberyn did a lot more in exile than just learning about poisons. He became a mercenary and joined the Second Sons for a time. After some time passed, he formed his own mercenary group, though the name of said group as well as their effectiveness in battle seems to be unknown. Like Jaime, Oberyn has also taken parts in tourneys, unhorsing his fair share of notable men such as Willis Tyrell, though he has faced his fair share of unhorsing as well, against the likes of Rhaegar Targaryen and Barristan Selmy. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I probably should, as there seems to be some people who are under the impression that Oberyn was not a knight. From what I understand, Oberyn is a knight. However, who knighted him is unknown, but we do know that he did knight Daemon Sand, though honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he just took the title himself, since few people would probably argue against him. Besides, knighthood does not always mean you are a great fighter. Just look at Lancel Lannister.
Now listen to me.
Enough about all that. Let's go over some events in the show and books. Specifically, Oberyn's fight against Gregor Clegane.
It's like this.
He lost. Okay, in all seriousness, there is a lot we can gather from this fight. The first being is Oberyn's choice of arms and armor, that being light for the most part. While he wore steel for some of the important areas, such as his greaves, vambraces, gorgets, spalders, and most important of all, his codpiece. However, everywhere else was lightly armored with leather, and his helmet had the visor removed, so it was more of a half-helm. And he did wear a byrnie. No, not that. There we go, much more effective. Well, he did wear a byrnie, and over that, scales of copper. His choice of weapon was arguably one of the greatest weapons humanity had ever created, a spear. And like any good Spartan, he paired it with a shield. This setup was obviously to make sure that Oberyn was as fast and agile as possible, to dance around Gregor and use the superior range of his spear to nick him and all of his openings and weak points until the mountain finally crumbled. And it would have worked, if only he could have kept his anger in check. But with their choices of weapons, armor, and talents laid out before us, I think we can finally make a clear decision on who should win. And with my expertise on the subject, the person who I deem as the winner is none other than Jaime Lannister. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Jaime is going to win every single time these two fight. Nothing is 100% after all. But when you look at their choices of weapons and armor, it's clear that the advantage goes to the Golden Lion over the Red Viper. First, let's look over the armor. While you can, of course, make the argument that Oberyn would be the faster fighter, Jaime isn't exactly going to be a slow, lumbering character. Everyone thinks that plate armor turns you into a sluggish, hulking, impenetrable force, and while it's true you need to sacrifice some speed for this protection, the sacrifice is not as substantial as people may think. You are still able to run, jump, and somersault despite wearing plate armor. Oberyn's choice of using a spear is actually a good one when dealing with an opponent in plate armor, as thrusting weapons are better at finding and taking advantage of the gaps in the armor. Yet, when we take into account that both fighters are using a shield, that puts the advantage in Jaime's side even more so. A shield is a great choice against the spear due to it making it far easier to get past the effective range of the weapon, making it a liability. We can read about this when Oberyn fought against Gregor Clegane. Once the giant made it past the spear points, Oberyn abandoned it and dodged and weaved until he was able to get back to the spear. Could you honestly say that if Jaime were to make it past Oberyn's spear, that he would be able to get away from the far faster Lannister when you compare him to Gregor Clegane? Not to mention, using a shield hampers Oberyn's offensive capabilities. His thrusting speed and force would be greatly diminished, so that he is unable to take advantage of his superior range to the fullest of his capabilities, making it even easier for Jaime to get past the spear point. The spear and shield combo was famous, but mostly for formation and battles, not in duels. Finally is Oberyn's choice of armor. While not nearly as lightly clad as his show counterpart, his choice of byrnie is a fairly good option against a sword, as it practically negates slashing damage. Not the force of the hit, but he won't be cut up. However, when it comes to thrusting attacks, we got a bit of an issue. Even if we assume that Oberyn is wearing gambeson under his byrnie, or some form of padded armor, neither armor is amazing when dealing with thrusting attacks, which Jaime's longsword is perfectly capable of dishing out. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of assumptions we can make that could change the tide of this battle. If Oberyn knew he was going to be facing Jaime, he might opt for heavier armor and have a sword as a backup weapon in case his spear becomes useless. Or maybe he would choose a weapon better suited against a foe in plate armor, such as a mace or even a poleaxe. But that is taking in a lot of assumptions, and we all know what assuming does. It makes an ass out of you and me. But still, maybe you disagree with my conclusions. Maybe my assumptions of the tactics and effectiveness of the armor and weapons are off, or you think that Oberyn's skill just far outseeds Jaime Lannister, that their weapons and armor don't matter at all. I would love to hear your conclusions, and if you're curious, all the videos that I used in my research will be in this description down below. Be safe everyone, and I hope you all have a good day.